Do y'all know that format with Mt Rushmore where you pick who's the heads? Today we're doing that, but with video game companies. I want to decide and discover what are the undisputed legends of game companies. Why are we doing this? Because I damn well feel like it, people. So, from innovators to modern gaming giants, I hope you all enjoyed the video and the idea as we carve out the iconic faces that have had a part in shaping the gaming landscape and explore the most influential people behind the industry. So ladies and gents, we're going to do 2 versions of Mt Rushmore, and I'll explain why later in the video when we do the second one. And the same way as I did my 11 game genre legend videos, if you've seen that, I'm going to be doing my best to keep personal bias out of this one and provide an objective perspective. If you want me to do a biased version, of course I can. And of course, let me know what you think of my picks and what you would put on Mt Rushmore for video game companies. I'm always curious to hear. So, starting off, I think our first company that belongs on the list is Rockstar Games. This probably shouldn't come as much of a surprise. Though Rockstar are far from my favourite game company, because many of their games just don't directly appeal to me, there is zero chance of denying the impact they have on the entire gaming landscape as a whole. They have constantly made the most beloved and successful games available on the market, and things like GTA 5 are hailed as the best open world experiences. GTA Online, of course, is one of the most profitable things out there, and the entire GTA series as a whole is beloved, dating even back to San Andreas, and even before that. And Red Dead Redemption 2 is being praised for having one of, if not the best story, and of course Arthur Morgan being one of the most beloved video game protagonists in history. And that's all because of Rockstar and Rockstar's hard work. And of course Red Dead Redemption 1 is even widely beloved. So I don't think there's an argument there. Bully has its own sizable fan base. I would consider that kind of a cult classic, to be honest. I think it's got a small following like that. Bully is pretty beloved as GTA in a school, pretty much. Same thing goes for the Max Payne series. And I don't think it's hard to see why these games are so beloved. Even Manhunt, while controversial, to say the least, that controversy only raised interest in the game, and obviously it's still developed its own following now. So for a company as swamping controversy as Rockstar is, there's only one other company in my mind that makes the video game community so happy. And that, of course, is Valve. The second game on Mt Rushmore, or the second game company on Mt Rushmore. This is where I'm worried a bit of bias might be coming in. But Valve, of course, they created the game distribution site Steam, and they are revolutionaries anytime they release something new. So even though I'm a little worried about bias, there's no doubt in my mind, like zero, that they've earned their space on Mt Rushmore. Half-Life practically invented the idea of putting a story and a narrative behind first-person shooter games, which is of course crucial because every Call of Duty game now drops with a campaign, or pretty much everyone. Left 4 Dead 2 is still recognised as one of, although I would argue it's recognised as the single greatest cooperative experience ever made. Portal and Portal 2 have a cult following and are upheld as some of the best puzzle games. CSGO is one of the most beloved competitive games ever, and is clear inspiration for games like Valorant. Like, you know, you can't compare with the influence something like CSGO has had on the competitive landscape. Games like Dota have their own following and are massively popular. And so, I'm led to believe that Valve has the gaming industry's love and respect more than any other company, because if they didn't, they wouldn't be able to run the biggest game distribution site for PC gamers. A site that's used in large part because Valve is so loved and trusted, more than because it offers good deals and stuff like that. And the next game we have on Mt Rushmore is Bethesda. I keep saying game, I'm very confused, but I always mean game company, obviously. And the next one, like I said, is Bethesda. So, I don't even think I've played a Bethesda game, although I definitely intend to get around to streaming some of their games soon. We'll be putting that up on the channel, so keep an eye on the live streams if you're interested. But even though I've never played a Bethesda game, they are beloved by the gaming community for their franchises. Obviously, this is things like Elder Scrolls and Fallout. So recently, Bethesda made the game Starfield, and it's been in some controversy, but I feel, in my time within the gaming industry, I don't think I often see the kind of buzz about games that Starfield has when Starfield was dropping. There was so much excitement around that game, and it's a very special thing. So, yeah. That's the kind of excitement that can only be generated from a good company like Bethesda. So, Skyrim, of course, is one of their popular and best-selling games. And it has the biggest modding community of any game ever, which I was surprised to learn, actually. I thought it would be Minecraft, but yeah, it's apparently the biggest modding community. And of course, the Elder Scrolls fans are extremely passionate about the franchise because they love it. Bethesda, like a lot of companies, have had controversies, but it doesn't hinder the sale, size, or scope of the company itself. Bethesda are still massive. Of course, the controversies include things like the release date of their games. Fallout 76 in particular was a buggy mess, but I don't think people care about the bugs when Bethesda are repeatedly releasing kits. Like, obviously the bugs are annoying, but compare that to just how many copies they sell and just how big the fan bases are. And then you have Prey, which I've seen people suggest is the most underrated video game of all time. I honestly don't think you can make an argument against Bethesda being one of the most recognizable video game companies. One of the giants, because it is so big and every game that Bethesda released pretty much is such a massive hit. And I think that's for good reason. But obviously, this is where it gets hard. There's 4 presidents on Mt Rushmore, and we've only touched on 3 game companies. So what the hell is the 4th one? And I think that's a good question. While I think the first 3 picks are all pretty indisputable, this 4th option kind of really threw me off. I had to sit here for a while thinking about it and thinking about what it would be, and I'm still not sure about it. I mean, a lot of companies really are worthy of consideration here. I know when I first thought about this video, I thought Telltale could be a good pick, but considering Telltale went bankrupt, maybe they aren't the GOAT people. You know, maybe putting Telltale here would be a little debatable. Because if they were that good, they probably wouldn't have went first. But I think From Software is definitely worth considering. People are extremely passionate about all their series. I'll touch on that later. Square Enix, Ubisoft, Activision. There's so many strong competitors here. Oh, and I probably should have mentioned this earlier in the video, but I'm gonna mention it now because it's important. When I was making this video, I excluded 3 companies from this list. And it's Microsoft, Sony, and Nintendo. I think it's pretty obvious why I've excluded these companies, but I think A, all 3 of these companies are just as recognizable for their consoles as they are for the games themselves. But also, I just think it would be obvious that I'll take the top spot and it'll be inarguable. And I think that'll be boring, and I just want an entertaining video. So I don't want to put Microsoft, Sony, and Nintendo here, because boring, who cares? And I just want to give other companies some credit, companies that might not always get the same credit as these 3. So anyway, let me stop yapping and tell you that I decided, at least for my video in the end, as stumped as I was on this, the 4th game company I'm going to put on Mt Rushmore is Naughty Dog. So I'm still doubting this one immensely because I think there's so many good options and I'm very, very skeptical. But obviously one of their biggest successes comes from The Last of Us, which, for those of you who aren't aware, it won 2013's Game of the Year, which is a huge credit. So winning Game of the Year, as big as that is, that's a big thing to be able to value. And then, of course, they're also behind Uncharted, which is an extremely critically acclaimed series, and one I'm considering on starting on the channel soon. Another series we'll be streaming through if you guys are interested in watching that. While not everyone enjoyed the sequel to The Last of Us, obviously The Last of Us Part 2, it seems pretty inarguable to me that everyone who has played it thinks it's a strong game telling its own fantastic story, and the people who didn't like it have their own personal reasons, from just being put off from what happens at the start of the game to being forced to play as a different character. But it seems that it's still a good story with a good game if you can get past that stuff. So obviously I do think Naughty Dog is very worthy of consideration. So there's our main video game, Mt Rushmore, people. We're putting Valve, Bethesda, Rockstar, and Naughty Dog up there. So people, I mentioned earlier that we're going to do 2 Mt Rushmores, the second one being about indie devs. Why is that? I decided to separate them because I wanted to touch on indie developers and talk about them a little and consider them for being on Mt Rushmore. But at the same time, I don't believe that there's an indie dev who's reached the same level of success as big companies. An indie dev who would be able to justify their place alongside these bigger companies, unfortunately. And the reason for that is that indie devs just don't have the time and they don't have the same extensive game catalogue as the big companies. But at the same time, indie devs have some of the biggest games of all time, so I do think they're worth touching on. So how about for indie developers? This one's very interesting. And so, I was gonna say I was stumped thinking about this, but honestly, I really wasn't. I thought the first 2 picks were very obvious. So we're gonna start with Scott Cawthon, which I think is self-explanatory. He's responsible for quite possibly the largest indie horror series, and is definitely the biggest mascot horror game, with literally defining the genre. Five Nights at Freddy's, he's responsible for that. He made the first game, he made the series, he made mascot horror. Horror is, in no uncertain terms, what it is today in the gaming landscape because of Scott Cawthon. So FNAF's an insanely large franchise with over 10 games, and it all started with Scott doing everything himself, even the voice acting. And for that, I think he deserves a tremendous amount of respect and appreciation. FNAF has easily become a classic game, and in my humble opinion, it completely deserves every little bit of appreciation it receives. It's not easy to define or even invent a genre, and Scott Cawthon did just that with an indie game. But, so, is there any other indie developer who's done that, who's defined the genre? There isn't one that comes to my mind, but I'll tell you, I think of someone who's redefined the genre. What comes to mind is Toby Fox, as second indie dev on Mt Rushmore. Someone who I believe is in large part successful due to his capability with music alone. He's of course famous for Deltarune and that series with all the games linked to it. And of course, the first game he made, Undertale in particular, being considered one of the biggest indie games of all time, if not the biggest. Undertale received major success, and so Toby, like Scott, was an obvious pick for me. He's an incredibly talented and creative individual, and it shows when his Kickstarter alone achieved $51,000 from 2,400 backers. And to put this into perspective, when he started that Kickstarter, Toby Fox was only after $5,000, which means he made 10 times the amount he set out to that Kickstarter. And unlike Scott, who had multiple failures before he made FNAF, I think people are clearly interested in Toby right off the jump, and I think it's easy to see why. And I think that interest really defines him as one of the biggest indie game devs out there. His games bring a unique spin on the RPG genre, and I can't think of many people who deserve the success he earned. So again, I think this is someone who deserves a massive amount of respect, and was. And it... Ow! It just kicked my desk, people. Anyway, I do think that Toby, right there, he was an easy pick, just like Scott. And I think this third pick gets a little harder, but I went for Edmund Macmillan, who, despite being a little harder, was still one of the first people I thought of. Obviously, he made Super Meat Boy, The Binding of Isaac, The End Is Nigh. Edmund made a lot of games, and so he's infamous for the difficulty presented to gamers through Super Meat Boy, which is widely considered one of the toughest platforming games of all time. I think if you have familiarity with Super Meat Boy, you'll understand exactly the kind of suffering. That difficult but fair design philosophy behind the games is what I believe makes him such a well-liked and well-respected indie dev. Following the same strategy as From Software, I think gamers love facing challenge and difficulty in their games, and not just gamers, but people in general. They like being challenged while still having it feel fair. So having difficulty while still feeling like it's your fault if you fail something, I think it creates a really powerful sense of accomplishment when you finally do achieve success. And so, generating this feeling is something that both Binding of Isaac and Super Meat Boy excel in, just like the From Software games. And so, if I were to carve out Mt Rushmore, that's why I would put Edmund McMillan up there. And now, this is where things get really tough. Okay, who would have guessed it? Picking out a fourth place for Mt Rushmore is really difficult. But for me, let's talk about the honourable mentions first. Would you guys like to talk about that? And then we'll talk about why I picked this last one. So for honourable mentions, because obviously there's so many good indie devs out there, I looked at Hazelight Studios, which is of course the company behind cooperative gaming as it is today. They've made A Way Out, It Takes Two, and they're continuing to make games that put an emphasis on cooperative working together with friends, and I think that's really special. Inner Sloth, of course, for those of you who don't know, Inner Sloth is behind the Henry Stickmin franchise, but more importantly, they're behind Among Us, the biggest social deduction game out now. Absolutely massive, and it deserves a lot of love and respect because the social deduction genre is fantastic. Finally, this one is interesting to me. If you want to make the argument that it's an indie game and an indie dev, you're putting them on Mt Rushmore. There's no way you're not putting them on Mt Rushmore. But I went with Notch or Mojang. The reason obviously being Minecraft. Minecraft started as an indie game from indie devs and indie companies. But I didn't put it on the list. I didn't put it on Mt Rushmore, because I don't feel comfortable including them based off their current status. I don't feel comfortable discerning them from an indie dev to a major dev, but I also don't feel comfortable with saying they're a major dev, and even if I did say they're a major dev, I don't think they could compete with the other big companies just based off having one good game. I was kind of at loose ends here, but I do think they have a chance to be on the Mt Rushmore somewhere. And if you consider them an indie dev, they'll go in the indie section for you. But anyway, our fourth place on Mt Rushmore is gonna be Deck 9 Studios. For those of you who don't know, the ones behind Life is Strange. And of course, Life is Strange is one of the most famous narrative choice-driven Telltale style games out there, if you get what I mean. And I do think it's for good reason. With Deck 9 at the helm, they've had an incredibly special experience, and they continued that work with a game called The Expanse. However, I think they're probably the most replaceable indie dev I have picked, especially with so much good competition. They're really only famous for Life is Strange, and while I think that does make them worth considering, I think you could easily make an argument to put someone else here, and I don't think you'd be wrong for making that argument. So, yeah, there's your Mt Rushmore as far as I'm concerned. The indie and the AAA. Heyo, ladies and gents. Welcome back to being with President Jamsey and not that fucking idiot who was just chatting. Hope you all enjoyed this. Please let me know if you have. If you've enjoyed the idea or the video in general. Let me know if you're interested in a sequel as well, or if you want me to do a biased version of this. I would absolutely be down to do this again. And of course, let me know if you agree or disagree, because I always love hearing the thoughts of the people who watch. It's so fascinating reading through your comments. And hey, if you don't want to comment what you thought, Comment Squirrel Jamsy. Comment hashtag Squirrel Jamsy. Let me know you watch and listen to these outros where I yap and I don't say anything of value for a minute or two. Hashtag Squirrel Jamsy chat. Anyway, I got this idea from a guy called the Boomer Sumer, whose channel and video I will probably put in the description because it was a really good video and I really enjoyed it. But Mr. Boomer Sumer did a version of this with superheroes, so that's where I got the idea. Apart from that, please, if you've enjoyed and you decide to show some support, drop a like down below. Please subscribe. Make sure to join the Discord to become a strong member of the community. I love you all. Thank you all for watching, and I hope you all have a fantastic day. Bye bye.